You know, now the United States, we have an airplane called the Supersonic Concorde. That airplane can fly from England or France to the United States in 3 hours. It's called Mach 2, 1,300 miles an hour. But people in America aren't happy. They aren't satisfied. Many businessmen, government people would like to fly in 1 hour. You know, if we could fly to Paris or London in 1 hour, we could live there and work here and fly back and forth. It'd be much faster, and we could share our ideas better with France and England and the United States. So, the government decided to give a lot of money to the industry to investigate and try to develop a better airplane than the Concorde. That required the industry many years, 10, 12 years to work, and finally they succeeded. They were ready on May 1st, 1994. The new airplane was called the SSCF-4, really ultrasonic airplane. It could get there in 1 hour. It was real quick. So came the important day, May 1st, 1994. The people all flocked to New York, the JFK airport. There were newspaper writers, radio reporters, TV people, and businessmen, high government officials. And they all flocked there waiting for that new airplane to take off. President Jackson, the United States President, was sitting in the Oval Room of the White House with his cabinet, sitting around the table watching a large television screen, and workers in different factories and hospitals, schools, and they suspended work just to watch the television to see the ultrasonic plane take off. All over the United States and the world, they were watching their televisions, and it was ready. Then all of a sudden it roared, and the engines opened to 174,000 pounds of thrust and started to take off. In a few seconds, it hit the sound barrier. And once it struck it, boom, the sound barrier, that sonic boom, had never been up to that level before. The people all across the United States heard the sonic boom, and they were still watching the television and watching that white cloud there. And in the White House, the President Graves, smiled and said to the cabinet members, "It seems our airplane has succeeded beautifully in this experiment." And he was talking, and the cabinet was looking at the President with a real puzzled look on their face. And again he says, "Our experiment has succeeded, right?" And the cabinet looked around, and the Secretary of Health stood up and said, "Excuse me, Mr. President, we can't understand you." The President looked and saw his lips moving, but he couldn't understand him. And the other cabinet members looked around and looked at each other and started talking, and no one could understand each other. So they picked up a phone, and there was no sound on the phone. And they were wondering. So the Secretary wrote a note to the President, "It seems we have temporarily lost our hearing from the sonic boom, and it's made us temporarily deaf. Let's call the White House physician." They were sitting around waiting, and in the U.S. Senate, the Vice President was calling a meeting to order, and all the senators couldn't understand a thing. The senators started talking to each other, and they couldn't understand each other, and they became frightened. It became a scene of panic. Everybody was afraid, making gestures. They didn't know what to do. Later, they got a telex from the U.S. Surgeon General. He called and he said that all men and women and children in the United States have become completely deaf from the sonic boom. Everyone was shocked. So it happened in our nation, became a nation of deaf people. No hearing people were left. Everyone was deaf. The stores had to buy large pads of paper, and people were going in and writing back and forth. Radio business just completely collapsed. Television industry was real depressed because people couldn't understand anything. Phone operators all day long were just sitting back because there were no phone calls being made. They were just sitting back drinking coffee. Occasionally they would have a telephone call through TTY and they'd know that person. Oh, a deaf person. But it was a real quiet country. So the people were sitting around, but the president of the National Association of the Deaf called his board members, and they called a meeting in Washington, D.C. The NAD board all flew in, and they discussed the problem. They said, maybe we better have a meeting with the White House and help our country. Sure enough, they sent a telegram to the President of the United States, and President Graves got it, and he saw that they would be willing to help us. And so, oh, we've been deaf all our lives, and maybe you're awkward right now, but we can help you. So the cabinet was shown the telegram, and so the NAD board was invited to the White House to meet with the President, Graves, and his cabinet. And they were in awe. They saw the sign language going on, and now the hearing had become deaf, and they were writing back and forth to each other. They had to write fast with notes back and forth, and they agreed. And the president announced that we'll set up a national program of sign language. And he picked up an expert to direct all the public schools and all the colleges, and they were required to learn sign language throughout the country. And many deaf people got fine jobs. Even some hearing people who had become deaf were teaching sign language. And all over the United States they were signing. Car radios were removed and replaced with television sets. Car horns were removed, and lights, like on fire engines, were put on there. And people were deaf. It was a deaf world. And now it came time for the political campaigns. Of course, the people who had long since been deaf were very fluent in signing, and other recently deafened people were clumsy in their signing, and they lost all their elections. And Governor of Montana and Governor of Maryland, and deaf people were becoming mayors. And finally, a campaign and election, Tim O'Hara, the president of the NAD, had run for president of the United States. And he just took off. He won easily. And that's how we got our first deaf president of the United States.